Welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for staying with us. You're watching Plain Speak with me, Shivani Gupta. The Waqf Act, introduced in the year 1954, was enacted to regulate and declare Waqf properties. In 1995, the law was modified and now it has become a massive bone of contention. There is a growing chorus to review and relook. Some even say repeal the act, given, quote, unlimited powers to claim properties in the name of Muslim charity accorded to Waqf boards that now exist in every state and union territory in India. You would be surprised to know that after the army and the railways, Waqf boards are the third biggest owners of land in the country. In the last decade or so alone, the amount of properties with Waqf boards has doubled in acres. The biggest allegation is that a lot of this land is acquired by encroachment. You encroach upon a land, Waqf board then investigates, deems that the land indeed belongs to Waqf activities and singularly acquires it. And for this decision making, the board is judge, jury, executioner. It can decide on its own. Given the obvious conflict of interest prevailing here, it is surprising this provision and power continues. No wonder then, after especially the shocking story from Trichy, where entire villages with no historical background were claimed as Waqf land, there has been a lot of attention on this activity. Several argue that the Waqf itself is not born out of constitution, and in a secular country, such an act is violative of Article 14 and 15. On top of that, fears are mounting that Waqf can unilaterally acquire and deem lands as belonging to them, and there is no provision to safeguard anyone's property, even yours or mine, from such an inclusion. So is it time to relook at this act? I will take that question to our guests in just a bit. Now recently, especially this year, there have been a spate of pleas to legal challenges to this act, and now this debate has been ignited even in Parliament. Let's take a look at what all has happened just this year. So just this week, a bill has been introduced in Rajya Sabha to repeal the Waqf Act 1995. BJP MP Harnath has said that the Waqf decisions can't even be challenged in court, raising this as one of the objections against the act and the powers given to Waqf boards. Earlier this month, an MP court issued notice to state government and centre on a plea which said that Waqf is made under the garb of managing properties, but it is doing something else. Earlier in October, Allahabad High Court sought a response from Attorney General and Advocate General. The plea says that there is no safeguard to save properties from inclusion in Waqf list. This is a growing fear, as I mentioned. Earlier in September, BJP leader and serial PIL filer Ashwini Upadhyay took his plea, which was earlier in the Delhi court, to the Supreme Court as well. He argues that this act is violative of right to equality and right to religion. There is also an argument that this only exists for one religion in a secular country like this, but similar powers or tribunal-type powers are not given to other boards. Earlier in May, a lawyer had also filed a plea in Delhi court, saying that the law is against the basic structure of the constitution. Now, one of the biggest issues with the Waqf Act is, as I mentioned, unbridled powers given to the board in determining what is Waqf land. So let me just take you through that. Now, the board collects information on properties it believes to be belonging to the Waqf. The Waqf board then conducts an inquiry into the said property. Now, here's the kicker. If the board is satisfied, it can unilaterally claim that the property belongs to the Waqf. And the decision of this board, unless modified or revoked by the Waqf Tribunal, is final. So the Tribunal is also there. Now, there is a mention of a provision that any such decision can be challenged in a high court. But you see, the very argument is this. It binds someone in legal mires without having any say before it gets to court. So any ordinary individual can be first dispossessed and then be left fighting for her own property in court. And we all know how long court matters can take. So the big debate that is coming up today, is it not indeed time to relook at Waqf Act? You would remember that here on Plain Speak, we have debated this a few times. Now this has been raised in Parliament too.
ये जो एक्ट बनाया गया है कांग्रेस सरकार ने 1995 में देश को तोड़ने के लिए, मात्र मुस्लिम समाज के लोगों को के वोट लेने के लिए बनाया, ये कानून जो है निरस्त होना चाहिए।
No elaborate provision has been made in the Waqf Act to identify and determine the status of property as Waqf property, and the provision made for inclusion of a property as Waqf property is not in conformity with the principles of natural justice. Can you just give me an idea? How does this work? Can the Waqf board internally assess and say that this property is ours and then nobody can challenge it?
My property is registered by the first registration happened in 1917. When did the Waqf board come into existence? When did the Waqf board? To my knowledge, it came to existence only in 1954. What is the proof they have? Do they have any evidence? Do they have any notification or document which shows these things?
महोदय, तमिलनाडु के त्रिची जिले में 95% हिंदू आबादी वाला एक गांव है तिस जैनथरई। बोर्ड ने पूरे गांव की संपत्ति को अपनी संपत्ति घोषित कर दिया। आश्चर्य को उस गांव के 1500 वर्ष पुराने मंदिर को जो इस्लाम आने से पूर्व बना था उसे भी अपनी संपत्ति घोषित कर दिया।
Let's go across and take this to our guest joining us. Raghav Avasthi is a lawyer. He's also part of the BJP. Ratan Sharda is author and political analyst, leans towards the RSS. Kapil Sankla is senior Supreme Court advocate. And Maulana Masoodul Hassan Kazmi, Islamic scholar, is also joining us. Raghav, let me come to you first up. I'm sure you are aware, both as a lawyer and as a political activist, the objections that are being raised to the Waqf Act. Now there's a private member bill that is being moved as well. But why shouldn't the government come out and clarify what their position is? Do you believe the government is incumbent to do that?
So I think if there are PILs that are pending, then the government will of course have to come and clarify as to what its position is.
Right.
Although the default position of any government is that if there is a legislation on the statute books, they generally defend it. But in some cases, they can also take a contrarian view. If you ask me my view as a lawyer, then I think there are some there are some paradoxes as far as the Waqf Act is concerned. So a Waqf, as per Muslim law, as per Islamic law, is a dedication to God.
Yeah.
And the other thing with the Waqf is that it is irrevocable. And as a matter of fact, I was doing a case recently where there was a Waqf property and the Waqfnama itself said that that it was being used for totally commercial purposes. And so there are a lot of Waqf properties like this that are used unscrupulously by land grabbers and for commercial purposes. And then you have the Waqf board, which more often than not will give its imprimatur or will give its stamp of approval to incidents of blatant land grabbing. So somehow, like when these properties are being used for commercial purposes, then the idea behind dedicating something to God and by implication to charity is lost somewhere along the line.
Okay, let me actually take that. You make an important point. Actually, this is also some objections which earlier when I discussed this issue, we also got some members of the Muslim community on the show, from example, Rajasthan, who've also gone ahead and challenged Waqf boards. And, you know, what they are also saying that a lot of these properties are actually not used for what Waqf properties are meant for. They're meant for charity. They're meant for upliftment, let's say, of the Muslim community. But as you're very rightly pointing out, you know, in lived reality, a lot of us know that these Waqf properties actually are not used for that purposes. That itself should be strike one. But let me, on this point alone, bring in Maulana Kazmi and his opinion on this.
About the act. Shivani ji, just make two more points about the act. So, because I was actually doing a case like a property dispute before the Delhi High Court in which the provisions of the Waqf Act were involved. So, you have Section 43 of the Waqf Act. Section 43 says that if a Waqf has been dedicated in any part of India by way of a Waqfnama, then it will be a Waqf and it will be recognized as such. So you have a situation where there are huge plots of land that were dedicated, let us say 100 or 200 years ago, right? And you have a Mutawalli who's a bit like the Karta of a Hindu joint family, and the Mutawalli is using it for his or her commercial purpose, but nothing can be done about it. And even the members of the family, right, or the descendants of the person who in fact made the initial dedication cannot do anything about it. So I think the Waqf Act of 1995 needs to go, and this whole idea of Waqf property should be restricted perhaps only in case of mosques or dargahs or other premises like that. But the problem is that Waqf, the whole concept of Waqf is being used to grab land and then to misuse that land for commercial purposes.
Okay.
That is the problem.
Can I take that as an open argument to Maulana Kazmi also? There are two things. One is that how is the Waqf land determined is becoming a bit of a controversy, especially after what happened in Tamil Nadu, where entire villages are being claimed as Waqf land. Now, you could argue that the government can step in or go to the courts and prove that it is not so. But that's exactly the problem. How can one side unilaterally decide that this is Waqf property? Something has to be done at the preliminary stage also only to decide that. And secondly, we asked the Waqf board, Raghav, just 1 second. We asked the Waqf board in that case to give us papers or any proof on the basis of which they did that, and we've still not heard any answers on that. They just said that, you can go and see our website or we will look into this. But how did they even pronounce it as Waqf property, which is quite shocking. Maulana Kazmi, the second issue is that even the properties which may be legitimately Waqf properties are not being used for the purpose that it is deemed for. Do you think this is not objectionable, Maulana Kazmi? That something needs to be done about this?
So, Shivani ji, you made 2 points. You asked 2 questions.
Yeah.
Number 1, I have also gone through the Waqf Act and the Waqf Act amended in 2013. There is no word regarding the Waqf board. The Waqf board can claim anybody's property and it will be full and final. Nothing. These are the misleading allegations from the people. Number 2, the Waqf land, Waqf properties are from the Muslim for the betterment of the Muslim, for the education of the Muslim, for the masjid, for dargah, for khanqa. So the point is that we have also the tribunal, Waqf tribunal, and I also can refer here the Waqf tribunal. What is the Waqf tribunal? The act says one person who shall be a member of the state judicial service, holding a rank none below than a district magistrate or civil judge or class 1, who shall be the person of the chairman of the Waqf tribunal. Another person who shall be an officer from the state civil services equivalent in the rank to the date of the additional district magistrate members will be. So we are also pointing finger toward the people who are the judge, who are serving in the state judicial services. So we are also doing the contempt of the court. We are degrading the judicial service by saying that the tribunal, Waqf tribunal will not do justice. They do not trust the Waqf tribunal. Why they do not trust Waqf tribunal? We also have the SC/ST commission in our country. SC/ST commission stipulates then the member, all the members, chairmen, vice chairmen will be from the SC/ST communities. They also have the similar tribunals. So why is the objection only on the Waqf tribunal? Why do we have only objection on the Waqf board?
Okay.
We can challenge if Waqf board does something wrong with any person or taking or graving the land of any person, property of any person. We can challenge this.
Yes, sir, I get that. You're
provision
absolutely right on all of those counts. The problem is that how can a body be given the right to determine the property on itself is the point here. Challenge kar sakte hain, wo baat sahi hai aapki. But why should somebody have to challenge after the decision of the Waqf board on determining what is Waqf property? That determination should first happen by a neutral authority. Now the Waqf board is not going to be neutral while assessing a Waqf property. That kind of right cannot be given to an agency or a group or a trust in this case, which in itself has vested interests. Why should I be left challenging their decision?
There is no word in the Waqf Act that the Waqf board words will be final. There is no word.
Sir, the Waqf board makes a decision unilaterally on whether the property belongs to them or not. It can deem them as a Waqf property. उसके बाद आप कर लो जो करना है. पर ये जो प्रॉपर्टी को डीम करने वाली बात है कि ये वक्फ की है या नहीं, ये उसी रूल से करिए ना जो सबके ऊपर अप्लाई होते हैं। वक्फ बोर्ड कैसे डिसाइड कर सकता है ये?
नहीं देखिए, नहीं, अगर डीडीए किसी की प्रॉपर्टी को, किसी लैंड को कब्जा करता है,
सर डीडीए और वक्फ बोर्ड का कंपैरिजन नहीं है, डीडीए ट्रस्ट नहीं है।
तो हम कोर्ट में जाते हैं उसको।
बट सर डीडीए इज ए गवर्नमेंट अथॉरिटी, वक्फ इज नॉट अ गवर्नमेंट अथॉरिटी, वक्फ इज अ ट्रस्ट, ऑन टॉप ऑफ दैट इट्स अ रिलीजियस ट्रस्ट, इट कैनॉट बी कंपेयर्ड टू डीडीए। सर इट कैनॉट बी कंपेयर्ड टू डीडीए, दैट्स प्रिसाइसली द क्वेश्चन हियर कि ये जो पावर दी गई है वक्फ बोर्ड को, क्या वो कुछ ज्यादा ही नहीं है? मेरा आपसे एक सेकंड, मेरा आपसे दूसरा सवाल ये था कि वक्फ की जो प्रॉपर्टीज है वो भी वक्फ के कामों के लिए यूज नहीं होती हैं, उस पे आपका क्या कहना है?
ये सवाल आपका बिल्कुल सही है, मैं इस बात को मानता हूं। देयर आर एलिगेशन इन द ऑल द वक्फ बोर्ड इन द कंट्रीज ऑफ इरेगुलरिटीज, दिस इज ट्रू, बट ये भी उसके लिए ज्यादा, दिस आल्सो गोज टू द पार्टी belonging, because in the state which has waqf board, the state which has the power of the specific political party, the waqf board chairman also belong to that party. Waqf board chairman, chairpersons and all the members.
But that's not a defense of what is happening. Just the fact that a member of the political party is part of the board is not a defense of the act.
तो सवाल ये है कि इस तरह के जो वो होती हैं उसमें गड़बड़ी है, उसका हम इलाज करना चाहिए, उसके लिए हमें लीगल रिकोर्स करना चाहिए। ये
अब यही प्रॉब्लम है ना, अब किसी गरीब आदमी की प्रॉपर्टी कोई ले वो क्या लीगल रिकोर्स लेगा? हमें क्या पता नहीं है हमारे देश में क्या हालत है? बिफोर आई ब्रिंग इन टू आवर अदर गेस्ट, यस राघव, व्हाट इज इट दैट यू वांटेड टू से? प्लीज से।
Under the Waqf Act, there is something known as Waqf al-Aulad. So what Waqf al-Aulad means is that if I am a Muslim, I can make a dedication that a certain piece of land or a plot of land will be used for the benefit of my family and descendants. So it is not only a Waqf that is created for a charitable or religious purpose that is recognized under the Waqf Act of 1995. So what happens in a lot of cases is that, let us say a Waqf al-Aulad is created with respect to a particular piece of land, and then there is a neighbor who has a dispute. Then the only tribunal which will have jurisdiction to decide as to who is right as far as the dispute is concerned and who is wrong would be the Waqf tribunal. Okay. So it is it is being misused as a tool of land grabbing. So that is the problem. So Waqf Act is not only about religious and charitable dedications for religious and charitable purpose, but it also recognizes a dedication for one's own family and descendants, which the family and descendants can use for the purpose of land grabbing later. That is my point.
Okay, and I think this whole thing about how you decide कि ये हमको दिया गया है और ये अब हमारा वक्फ का हो गया है. The Tamil Nadu. One second. Raghav, please don't speak over me. The Trichy case is a perfect example of that, where there are descendants of people who have their land property and suddenly one morning they woke up and realized that their property is now Waqf property. Fine enough, the government intervened in that case. But how did this even happen in the first place is the question. I want to go across to Ratan Sharda and then Kapil Sankla. I'll come to you once again for an overall legal perspective, because there are multiple pleas ongoing in multiple courts now against this act and a bill has been presented. Ratan Sharda, what do you make of the arguments, for example, that Maulana Kazmi has made so far? That one, there are similar trusts that are allowed for Hindus too. And secondly, that why are we looking at this with an eye of suspicion when there are government officers also in this tribunal?
Shivani, I'm very curious to know which are the other Hindu tribunals who have similar powers. I hope the two lawyers on the panel will be able to enlighten me on which Hindu trust has such powers, sweeping powers that Waqf board had. See, if they say that, okay, whatever somebody claims to be my land, I have to become Waqf land or Waqf asset. Mughals ruled India for more than 70% land one time or the other. So every land to tomorrow Waqf can claim nearly 70% of the Indian land as Waqf property. Who can stop them? As of last date of I think 2021, 8,54,509 properties worth 8 lakh acres have been claimed as Waqf property. In 2009, number was just 4 lakh acres. How did the land increase? Secondly, during how unequal it is during partition, when Hindu refugees left Pakistan, then those properties are given to Muslims who migrated to Pakistan. But the properties which belong to Muslims who migrated to Pakistan were not given to Hindu refugees. They were given to Waqf board. So they have a property right over all the Mughals wherever they put their step. They have property right over whichever government wants to give them, and also illegal bazaars and all the illegal madrasas. They can also claim that is a Waqf property, which goes under the very totally against the very definition of Waqf property. And look at the discrimination. You say once a Waqf board, I don't know, Maulana is making some false allegation that there is no such law. If Waqf tribunal is so nice, then why did they not intervene in Tiruvannal case in Tamil Nadu before government intervened? They should have immediately raised hackles and say this is not correct attitude, but they did not. Just like they never spoke against triple talaq till the bill came. So you can talk about very noble intentions of your tribunals, but that doesn't appear to be doing in the real life. And if you say discrimination, if Hindus allegedly make any problem, have any problem with the temple, that can be taken over by the government. But if Waqf misbehaves or makes corruption in the case of assets, there is no action. A famous industrialist house in Mumbai has been built on Waqf property. It went to the court. What happened? House is still there. Has Waqf done anything? Because they were corrupt. So did government remove the Waqf board? They did not. So to claim that Waqf board is Allah's own men, I don't believe it, because they never spoke when it is required. And compare this to Hindu temple, there is a huge outrage somewhere in 2014-15 when Puttur temple, the person who was supposed to head that particular procession was a Muslim IAS officer. So we can have other religion people in our board of trustees in case of temple taken over by the government on flimsy ground of misuse, while basically it is to grab thousands of crores of rupees of assets and also cash. So this kind of irrational, undemocratic, unjust law cannot survive in the country. How it survives so long, that is question. I hope that this BJP government takes corrective step. It should be same for every religious denomination, every religion, every person. You cannot have an autonomous body which is above the court of law. Is it possible? You say tribunal will decide, and he says trust on tribunal, but I cannot go to court. So this particular private trust becomes more important or supersedes the law. On what ground?
No, I think they've given the legal powers of their own. Eventually, you can go to the High Court. But my question is, how can somebody...
do I have power to go to court? Do I have money?
Exactly. That's the point.
My life is destroyed. The entire temple, which is older than Islam, can be taken over by these Maulanas on pretext that they believe it is theirs. That is the most funny part.
I think that is quite frivolous. On top of that, you can be dispossessed of your land. For example, the Waqf board, once it deems that it is Waqf property, can ask you to vacate that property. और फिर आप घूमते रहो, फिर आप चक्कर काटते रहो. ये तो सही नहीं हो सकता. That's the problem. That they can dispossess somebody, they can deem it to be Waqf land and then say, okay, fight it in court. Now that's actually an abuse of power. So that kind of power cannot be given to a party which already has a vested interest in deeming it as a Waqf property. That's the precise idea.
On the railway platform, Majars on the bridges and the flyover made just 2 years back, do they become Waqf property? Have they ever objected the Waqf board?
No, sir, that's a slightly different argument. In many of those cases, obviously the railway boards and others, for example, governments have also acted and they've removed those illegal structures. That's a slightly separate argument, but there is an element of encroachment involved. I agree with that.
If tribunal is so good, did they act? That is my question.
Okay, fair enough. Kapil Sankla, I have a couple of very specific questions for you as a lawyer. But before I just wanted to comment, I read somewhere, it's an interesting commentary on sometimes the lopsided laws in our country. You compare on one hand the 1991 Places of Religion Act, Places of Worship Act, where in one sweeping motion, all the properties which Hindus believed they had the legitimate claim on because of ancient old beliefs, etc., and then Mughals coming and taking over those properties, now no longer can be challenged. We have one such unique law only in India, where you cannot go back and reclaim that land. On the other hand, you have Waqf Act, where post-partition, you just gave all of this land, which could not be challenged, and then since all of those decades, the powers of the Waqf board have only increased to become humongous. The property under them has also increased to become humongous, the third largest owner of land in India after railways and the army. So Kapil Sankla, those are two contrasting situations I just wanted to juxtapose for our viewers. And that's why these two laws often come under question. But I wanted to ask you, one comment that even the Supreme Court made recently when the plea went to them is that there are similar trusts, for example, that exist for the Hindu community too. So let's not look at it from the prism of religion alone. Could you just elaborate on that, that what are these Hindu trusts that have such powers? Because Ratan Sharda is asking that question. Yes, the Hindu Charitable Endowments Act, etc. exists, but do they have similar powers that the Waqf board does?
To the best of my legal knowledge, there is no such trust in any other religion, and in fact, to the best of my knowledge, anywhere in the world, and in Pakistan, even in Pakistan, where any trust or any organization has the kind of powers that the Waqf has. And that's actually quite tragic and quite shocking. Shivani, you were very right that, this is the largest owner of land in India, second only to railways and to the army. What's also interesting is, unlike any other organization, including the government, the onus shifts on the owner of the property to prove that the land belongs to him. Even the government does not have that right. It's quite amazing.
Yeah.
The government has to, so if DDA wants to take your land, it has to come and say what is the reason, who does the land belong to, why does it require it, or if it owns it, what is the proof that it owns the land. Waqf, there is no such requirement. Waqf, their own organization, their own board, their own tribunal can come and say this land belongs to us. The onus shifts. And the onus shifts, and it has to be proved in the tribunal. You cannot actually file a civil case. What's also very interesting, and this is what I was reading, is this, that when you have to file a case against the government, you have to give 2 months notice. There is no such required for any private party, any other trust, tribunal, anything at all, except for Waqf. Waqf, as far as the powers are concerned, is equal to the government of India if you want to file a case against them. That's again a very amazing and a very shocking thing. Thirdly, what's also interesting is that even if DDA or any other organizer or MCD wants to interject or want to intervene in a civil suit, it has to first seek permission of the court. There is no requirement for Waqf to seek that permission. It's again an amazing thing that I found out. That Waqf can just come and say, this is the case where the land belongs to us. So we have to be heard, and that is all that is required. And on that, the matter would now move from civil court to the tribunal and before the board where you move an application. So these are very interesting things as far as the powers of the board is concerned, and there is no organization, forget in India, I don't think there is any power like this in any organization anywhere in the world. And so therefore, what's also interesting as a lawyer I like to tell you is that there are 3 interesting cases of our High Court. And shockingly, those cases are not really talked about, and I wonder why. In 1984, Delhi High Court granted stay in a case, saying that the cases filed by Waqf and Mutawalli seem to be collusive. Now what was happening is that the Mutawalli will file a case against the Waqf. You know that the land belongs to Allah, so to say. Waqf is the manager of the land and a juristic person. Mutawallis supposedly work for the Waqf and have certain powers. Now Mutawallis file cases against the Waqf, saying that the land belongs to me. Win or lose, it's either the land then it belongs to either the Mutawalli or to the Waqf and not to the third party. So the High Court was seized of this, and in 1984 said that stay is granted because these lands belong to DDA and this land belongs to the government of India, and we don't know why they are not made a party. So in 1984 a stay was granted, and in 2011 the High Court again stated that this was Indraprastha Vishwa Hindu Parishad versus Union of India, said that the stay shall continue till the time the government does not come up with some cogent laws to show what land belongs to Waqf. Because the gentleman before me was absolutely right. The land cannot increase, but the corpus of the Waqf have been increasing steadily. I'm doing a case. This pertains to Turkman Gate. There are more than 150 shops belonging predominantly to Hindus and also to Muslims. Suddenly one fine day, Waqf wakes up and says this land belongs to us. That's not the end of it. Because when that case is going on, the Mutawalli comes and says, no, this land belongs to me. Now, the case is going on against the Mutawalli and against the Waqf, which are supporting each other. They are in cahoots. So either the land eventually will go to the Mutawalli or to the Waqf, but not to the actual people who have been using and in possession of those shops since independence.
No, but Kapil Sagla, what I don't understand is that the land deed, the land property papers will be with one party, right? So how is it that anybody can claim otherwise? If, for example, in your case, the shopkeepers have a legitimate right to claim and have, let's say, papers to say that, then what is the case?
See, as far as the Enemy Land Act was concerned, a lot of these people were refugees that came from Pakistan and they were given properties, shops, houses to stay.
Yeah.
Now, the value of those properties increased over time. And those properties could therefore, there could be a Waqf person or a Mutwali come and say that this land was bestowed upon the Waqf in 1952 to 1954 when the gentleman went to Pakistan. Now, how do you go against that? Because possession was given by the government. A lot of people have the property papers. A lot of them don't. A lot of them were only given occupation slips at that time. So the understanding between India and Pakistan was that the land that is left in the country would belong to the government. Pakistan, that law was followed. Unfortunately, India, it wasn't followed. Because that land, the next year itself, was vested with the Waqf and not with the people.
No,
which
that's
is what
where the
should have
problem
been
began,
done.
isn't it?
And therefore, after that, that's where the problem began. And then there were subsequent amendments to the Waqf laws, giving more and more power to the Waqf board. And now the tribunal, which was only in advisory capacity to the central government, is also not just advising but dictating
It's a court
to the
in itself.
government, to the state governments, and it's a court in itself. So understand this: these people have vested interest, and the challenge is before an organization that also has a vested interest. So where do you go? I think you said that you can challenge it in High Court. Actually, you can't. Now, what is interesting is there is no power of appeal. What you do is that you go in under your fundamental rights, you file a writ. Now, writ jurisdiction is extremely different from appeal, appeal being a right in itself.
Fair enough.
So
that's
therefore,
why,
when you go
that's
to
why
High Court,
a lot
you're
of
not going
people
as a
say that
matter
you
of
can't
right.
appeal the ruling of the tribunal even in court. I went through the Waqf
Yes.
Act myself. I saw a provision
Absolutely.
under its various sections
Yes.
that a decision of the tribunal may be repealed by a high court if any of the members of the party goes to court. You are saying that's a writ but not really a right to appeal, and there's a difference.
That is not a right to appeal. You're absolutely right. It's only under writ jurisdiction that you go to High Court or to Supreme Court, as the case may be.
Okay, so let me come to the final questions that I give all of my viewers an opportunity. Ratan Sharda, you were showing something on your mobile, and my final question also to you is that is it not time then to relook at this act, if not completely repeal it?
You said that properties have been removed. This is Prayagraj Junction, where there is a mazar or some kind of mosque there, and this has not been removed. This is railway property. Just to cement my point.
Okay.
As I said, that I am very sure this act needs to go down totally. As Mr. Sankla said, made some very pertinent, very surprising pointers, and I was not aware. As I said earlier, this particular case of Delhi, the properties were vested to the Waqf by our own government, and then they may be handed to the shop owners of the refugees, and now they are demanding it back. This collision between Mutwallis and Waqf board tells me that Waqf board is not a paragon of virtue, as we already said. They did not object to any of the land grabbing activities or corruptions or bad laws which are against the women or against poor, and now they say that we are paragon of virtues. We can't depend on Hindu priests. See, Hindu deity is supposedly owner of the land. Did government ever ask the deity that we can take over your land or temple? Never asked. No church can occupy property without a proper property papers. Only Waqf is the people of God who can do anything they want to.
You know, I don't even want to get into some of the issues of Hindu temples being under government control, or for example, even the Sabrimala case, where against the wishes or the tradition of the deity, it was decided who can enter and who cannot enter. I don't even want to get into that because, I do not really have time for that. But these are all interesting questions that come up when one particular trust gets properties which are almost unbridled. Raghav Awasthi, since you're also a member of the BJP, I want to ask you, your own MP in Parliament claimed that all of this is to be blamed on the Congress party. The fact that this was done in 1954 when it shouldn't have been done, then the revisions in 1995 and 2013 were solely, it is a suggestion for appeasement and by the Congress.
But BJP removed it for last 8 years, no?
Precisely.
BJP waited for 8 years for an MP to speak up?
Precisely. That's the question I asked him first. But anyways, Raghav, go ahead.
As far as the Congress party is concerned, there was always the impression that if they somehow pander to the most regressive elements of the Muslim community, that are hated within the Muslim community itself, then somehow Muslim votes will be delivered to them en masse. But this is not something that has worked out exactly as the spin meisters of the Congress might have thought. Today, the situation is that the Congress is actually not the first choice of Muslims anywhere in the country. And they've been losing election after election after election. They've lost the Hindu vote also in their search for Muslim appeasement.
No, but my question was that do you believe too that this was the creation of the Congress when it was in power initially, almost unchallenged post-independence, and then before it was just booted out of power, and there was some harakiri that was done here, that there was some collusion and harakiri, because in Delhi, for example, it is said that very prime properties were handed over to the Waqf board just before 2014.
Mr. Sankla pointed out very correctly that the kind of powers that the Waqf board has in India, when they do not even subsist in Pakistan or even Bangladesh. So the Congress party really needs to introspect, and if at all an amendment to the Waqf Act is brought in Parliament, because I really do feel that this whole idea of recognizing the concept of Waqf, Awqaf, not Waqf, Awqaf, which is the plural of Waqf by law, is something that has no place in a society that should be governed by the rule of law, constitution, and secularism. So it really needs to go. But the question is whether the Congress is going to be ready to undo it and whether they would support something like this in Parliament. I doubt that very much, although I can say with certitude that the blame for...
Raghav, this is your government, not Congress government. Why asking Congress? Let them be exposed. Bring the bill.
Okay, unfortunately, I've run out of time. I will take this forward. Let's see what happens as far as this bill is concerned. And as I mentioned, there are multiple pleas in court as well. I do thank all of our guests for joining us today for our debate number 1. Moving on.